Good morning and good afternoon for those of you, and good evening all over the place. My name is Greg Brail. I'm from Apigee. I'm here with Strey from Target. Feel free to introduce yourself.
My name is Strey. I am a senior engineer on the API team, or what we call our enterprise services team at Target.
And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Black Friday. We're going to start with a little bit about what it is, but we're going to talk about how Target gets ready for this major retail event of their entire year, and how they test their API, how they scale their API, and essentially what sort of things that you need to do in your own API program to get ready for a traffic surge like this. Aaron's going to do most of the talking. I'll be sort of the color commentator and driver here. But we have a little bit of administrative housekeeping stuff here for those of you who always ask the question. When we are done, what we're doing now, obviously, there's audio, which you'll hear. If you have a problem with the audio, feel free to go into the Q&A in the On24 app. We got some folks, Judy and Ashley and others are standing by to help out if anyone has any questions or technical issues. You'll be able to ask questions during the webinar using the Q&A there in the app. We will leave time at the end. The thing is scheduled for an hour. We'll try to wrap up the talking in 45 minutes at most, so we have time for questions. If there are too many questions and we run out of time, sometimes we'll do a blog later on to make sure everyone's questions get answered. We're also recording a video that's not live yet, but that'll show up on YouTube, as well as the slides will be on SlideShare. So feel free to take notes, but you don't need to, if you don't want, because you'll be able to get the slides and video later on when we're done. Yep. And with that said, we're going to start on with the basic info about Target. But first I thought maybe I'd ask you, what's a target?
What's a target? Yeah, so it's one of those things, if you do live in the United States, I would assume that you probably know what a Target is, but just a little bit about Target, right? We're one of the country's largest retailers. We have about 1,800 stores. And from an API standpoint, right, APIs are essentially powering, right, our mobile and multi-omnichannel business today. So we have APIs for product information, inventory, price, information about our locations, right? What time are they open? Where are they located so I can find them, right? Find the one that's nearest by to me. We have APIs for guest authentication. We have a card API so you can check out, right? And give us money for all the great products that we offer. And then we also have APIs for things like our lists and registry service, so wedding registries, baby registries, those sorts of things. And then the core users of our APIs are, right, an overwhelming majority of it is our internal or Target developed mobile apps, so Android app, iPhone app, iPad app. Then there's a core Target app. Then we also have the Cartwheel app, right, on all of those operating systems as well. And this isn't like a shameless
not a shameless plug, but I have the Target app here,
yeah.
And as I understand, this app I'm running that you can't see if you're online yet, is powered by the APIs that we're talking about.
Yes. Yep.
And I can assume that many millions of people have installed this app.
Yes, they have.
Cool.
Yeah.
So, and then let's talk a little bit about Black Friday. What is it?
So yeah, again, if you live in the United States and own a television, I'm assuming you probably know what Black Friday is. But in case there's people on the call from overseas, Black Friday is really the unofficial beginning of the holiday shopping season in the United States, right? Retailers like us, right, and our competitors offer, right, really deep discounts on hot items, and right, our most loyal guests line up out the door and around the store, right, to take advantage of those discounts. And from a system standpoint, right, this means an extreme surge in traffic, because everybody is on their phone checking on where's the nearest Target to me right now, because they may be at, right, Grandma and Grandpa's house, traveling for the holidays, and they're looking at, does this Target have this item in stock so I can go take advantage of it. So it creates this dramatic traffic surge, right, in API traffic on the back end, because like we said, right, they back end all of our mobile applications. And I have on here, right, a tenfold increase, and the tenfold increase is really a tenfold increase from a Tuesday afternoon. The actual day of the surge, depending on the API, is somewhere between probably 2 and 6 fold, depending on the API. But right, a good tagline sells books, so a tenfold traffic increase from an average Tuesday after.
From an average Tuesday.
Yeah.
When does it start? Because I was watching Apigee's traffic last year, and it seemed like Thursday.
Yeah.
Things started to go a little crazy.
So yeah, our stores open in the evening on Thanksgiving,
Okay.
and you get to see this actually really interesting traffic pattern happen across the United States as people are finishing up Thanksgiving dinner. You get your East Coast surge, then a couple little Central and Mountain, then your West Coast.
Okay, interesting.
Your West Coast surge. So it's kind of fun to sit and watch that happen.
Is Cyber Monday a real thing, or?
Yes, it is. I mean, it is a real thing. I think it originated back in the days, right, when people didn't necessarily have the web at home. So it was going to work on Monday. That's when I can access the web,
and now I'm at work. I finally have lots of time to kill.
Yes. I mean, it is still a thing.
So anyway, I just wanted to make sure that we talked about some of that background and understand what it is. And then, as I understand it, you volunteered to be the Black Friday guy at Target.
Yeah. So what we did touch on is traffic-wise, right? We're talking on a normal day, tens of millions of requests, right? Yes. So you can imagine, right, 10 times that or 6 times that, right? We're talking a significant amount of traffic. But yeah, so last year about this time we were sitting in a meeting with our whole program team, and my boss, Heather O'Sullivan, who I believe you've met, sort of said, who wants to be on point for ensuring that we make it through this peak season, right, without any hiccups? And I sort of said, well, I think I have a little bit of free time. Why not, right?
Why not?
I think I can take this on.
Yes, okay.
And afterwards you go back to your desk and there's a little panic attack, right? It's like, what did I just do? This is one of those thankless jobs, right? Where if everything goes well, you don't get a ton of pats on the back, but if something goes wrong, right?
You're eating Thanksgiving dinner at McDonald's, yes.
People are going to come after you. But then, right, you get from that to this sort of, right, it's an awesome engineering problem that me and a couple other people on the team had the opportunity to solve.
Yeah.
So,
excellent. Let's move on and talk a little bit about how you solved it. And you solved it through testing.
Yes. So, and testing was a large chunk of it, and a large chunk of our time investment. Yeah. So the first question we had to answer is how are we going to generate load, right? And coming from a large IT shop, really the tool sets that we had to choose from were vast, right? We had all of the open source tools like JMeter, Grinder, Curl Loader, and then we had a ton of vendor tools at our disposal as well. And we actually opted to JMeter, and I truly believe that we probably could have got the job done with any of the tools at our disposal. I think we opted to JMeter because it's proven, open source. People have proven out a number of patterns for doing distributed testing with JMeter. Mm-hmm. And then there's an awesome community around it. So any question I had, go to Stack Overflow, and many people have had the same problem before.
Right. So yeah, because my experience with JMeter has been that it's okay for a moderate amount of load. When we get to the kind of load you're talking about, out of the box, it just doesn't work.
It doesn't. So yeah, there's interesting things you can do in the cloud, right? Right, with that and with distributed testing, you can, right, the cloud is highly automatable. So right, we can write scripts to spin up instances on any cloud provider or our internal OpenStack, right? Yeah. Install JMeter, copy over some JMX files, which are the JMeter test scripts, and in parallel, right, we can run those tests, so we get by sort of the single machine constraints, but by using that approach.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what about some of these other tools you mentioned? Like on the slide, we're mentioning Grinder and Curl Loader. Do you try those?
I don't feel completely qualified because I don't have nearly the hands-on experience with those. I mean, a download and a tinker is what I would say, and just reading blogs and those sorts of things. Right. So yeah, I don't want to get too detailed with the compare and contrast on those, just because I don't think I would do the other tools justice. Okay. And I'd probably favor JMeter just because I know more about it. Yeah.
Now, this is something that I've seen at when we do performance tests at Apigee, which is that out of the box you got to do some work, and I've seen many performance test scenarios go wrong when the performance testing tool can't actually generate the load that you're trying to measure, and you immediately blame it on the thing you're measuring. Yep. Is there anything that you do to sort of get past that?
Yes. So that I think there's a couple interesting questions there. One is the cloud. I can always spin up more cloud instances and to drive more traffic, but at a certain point, right, JMeter by default is going to work on a number of users, right? A number of artificial users, and if response times get so high, right, I'm going to hit a throughput maximum at some point, and I'm not generating or spinning up more instances isn't going to necessarily generate more load. And there are ways in JMeter to get around that where you can drive the traffic from a transactions per second standpoint rather than a number of virtual users sort of standpoint.
Yeah. Do you have do you test the performance tests before you test it on the real thing?
Yes, absolutely. So we probably did, last year before we actually went live with our big, every API all at once tests. Maybe a dozen times just going through, spinning up, maybe 10% of what we were going to do and tweaking our scripts and making sure, right, that we got them. I'm absolutely right.
Cool. We have a couple questions coming in. I'm not going to answer them all in real time, but some of them seem kind of interesting. Is it a good rule of thumb to stress test your API with 10 times the amount of traffic?
Yes, I mean, I absolutely think it's a good rule of thumb if you think, right, that's what you're going to need to support. I would absolutely say that, right? Because it's a small cost in comparison to the cost of going down for an hour or two, right? When you're talking about, especially about a retailer our size, going down for an hour or two means a lot of lost revenue. Yeah. So I would say absolutely, it's a good rule of thumb.
Excellent. You ready to move on?
Yeah. Yep. I think the following slides sort of just touch on some of the big lessons that we learned as we were going through the process. And I think the first one is having discipline and taking really good care of your test scripts, right? Treat them like you treat your code. And I think the first thing is structure your plans in a way that makes sense. So, right, computer science 101, low coupling, high cohesion. And in the API world, it's really easy to decouple, right, your test scripts because our APIs are very nicely designed and decoupled. So we have a test script per API that are actually, right, if we're doing it right, those are developed as the API is being developed. So we should have this library, right, of per API test scripts. And what we really built out and are continuing to improve on is the orchestration mechanism that can sit on top of all of those test scripts and say, I want to run a test with all of my APIs that use OAuth, right? So I can ensure there's no bottlenecks right, in my OAuth solution. Or I want to run all APIs at once, or I want to run all APIs that have Cassandra as the backend or something like that, right? So and just decoupling our test scripts and then having a nice mechanism to execute them and orchestrate them, I think would be the first one. And the second one is put your test scripts in version control. So this seems very obvious and very basic, but early on in our program, before we had a ton of discipline around it, we actually had some test scripts walk out the door on developer laptops and contractor laptops. So we are much better, right? And we got much better at that. And it's great for things like code reviews and doing pull requests and all those sorts of things.
Now there's functional tests and stress and performance tests. I don't know if you separate those in the code base or if you develop them all at once or
today they're separate, right? The functional tests and performance tests are completely separate. Now it's not that we don't go look at our functional tests to inform, and there's some interesting things you can do with JMeter is we could proxy our functional tests through JMeter, record them. It doesn't always work perfectly, so you usually would have to go back in and tweak those a little bit, but no, I think the short answer is we don't necessarily treat them with the same thing or even use the same sort of tool sets to accomplish each of those.
Okay. On to predicting your traffic, and someone did already ask, how do you determine the correct workload?
Yeah, so after you get all of your technology in place, to write your platform for running your tests, the next hardest part, and probably the overall hardest part, and I don't want to undermine the technical bits because they're not easy and you need highly skilled people to do them, but if you have the best testing platform in the world and you test the wrong load profile, probably tested nothing.
Right.
Right? So in the last 5 years, I don't know if you've heard about it, but there's this sort of industry development happening around big data. And in the age of big data, our ability to come up with traffic patterns and put together some relatively simple, actually, algorithms to determine what we anticipate traffic to be is sort of unparalleled. Because we're logging information about every single API request that comes into production, about the request URI, the time that came in, the response times, all of those things. And we're also logging all the way down our stack, right, at the app layer, at the data store layer. And by logging those things and persisting them, I was able to, last year at this time, go back to the year before, look at traffic on Thanksgiving, look at traffic 2 Sundays prior, and on a per API basis or even per method basis, say here's the multiplier that we expect, or that we saw last year on our locations API. It increased 6 times from 2 Sundays prior to this Sunday. And I can sort of build a little model that I can then apply, okay, 2 Sundays before this Black Friday, I can use that multiplier to predict what I expect traffic to be. And we came surprisingly close, actually, last year using that method to come up with our volume prediction. And it's not only volume, it's mix of traffic too. So how many people are calling our nearby stores API using lat-long coordinates versus an address or a zip code, right? Because the computational effect on the back end of those is very different. One of them, I have to, if I pass a zip code or an address, I have to geocode that first.
Yeah.
And then go look and see how far away stuff is. If it is lat-long coordinates, I don't have to do that step, right? So we can come up with models because we have all that data. And I sort of have this quote in there, make everything as simple as possible. And in the instance of getting nearby stores, this is 100% safe operations, right? 100% guess, 100% leads. Yeah. And in that case, what we do is I just go mine 500,000 actual production requests, or however many I want, and we just replay those in production, so we can be certain that the mix we're getting is reflective.
So you're replaying actual traffic,
actual production,
at least
traffic.
For something like that.
For something like that, right? So, but not simpler. Make everything as simple as possible, but not simpler. We can't do that with stuff like carts and checkout, right? We have to mock up some user IDs and come up with some test data to simulate the process of signing in, adding items to a cart, and then checking out, and those sorts of things. So it doesn't work everywhere, but where it does, don't spend the time doing all this analysis when you can just replay. The stuff that you have there.
That is pretty cool. So now talking about predicting the new usage is hard.
Yes. So when you don't have history to look at to come up with your model, it's extremely difficult, or it's a lot more difficult to predict what those traffic patterns will look like. So when you have a new app coming online, like when we have Cartwheel coming online, one of our apps, we can come up with some predictions. We work with our consumers really hard, but it's like predicting anything. I mean, it's just difficult that hasn't happened yet. So you're not going to be exact. I'd always say err on testing the higher end of your estimate, right? Better to be safe than sorry. But yeah, I mean, the only real pointers are keeping an open dialogue with your API consumers, and working closely with them to ensure that you're always on the same page about what their expectations are.
Okay.
But there's no magic potion for that one.
Okay. And you mentioned logging a little bit, and you mentioned that you log everything and you use that to replay traffic, but it sounds like that's
so
pretty important.
Yes, there's logging and monitoring for traffic prediction. Then there's logging and monitoring for, and this, I mean, it's all the same tool set, right? But this is just a different lens for when we're running the test, the sort of insight we can get into the behavior of our system. So we log, like I said, we log everything, we persist it, we're continually pulling our infrastructure at the lowest levels to understand memory utilization, CPU utilization, as well as logging all those application level details like request URI, information about headers, and when you do that all the way down the stack, and you have this sort of central log analysis tool set available, and you're persisting it, you can go in and query and put together a nice little view that says, here's my API response time, here was memory usage on the JVM, and here was memory usage on the host that's running Cassandra. Right?
Yeah.
Right? So it just provides some really powerful ways to look at what's happening in your system and diagnose.
Do you actually go back and say, show me what was happening
Yeah.
last Friday at 10 p.m. when
Yeah.
the response time shot up?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And that's why it's logging and monitoring. We actually, a couple of peers on my team gave an entire presentation on how we log and monitor our APIs. So if you Google logging and monitoring APIs, it'll be one of the first things that popped up. But there's tons of cool stuff in there that we're using it for. There's also, right, sort of business intelligence sort of stuff you can gain from that. Right, think about the ability to say, where are people located when they're searching for nearby stores? Are there people searching for nearby stores in an area we don't have a store? Right, we could mine that, and maybe that's a data point we could give to property development. This is just a theoretical use case.
No,
right?
but I love theoretical use cases.
Yeah.
Are great. Yeah, which is like, gee, a lot of people and whatever.
Yeah, and we don't have a store, so that could be a data point that our property development could put together with demo information and all the other sorts of stuff they use to decide
that would be
where
really
they should build a
interesting.
new store. So it's not limited to the operational stuff, right? There is, when you have structured, right, RESTful APIs, you can do some of that.
So then you have you have a reactive corporation, right?
Yes.
You're reacting to signals from the
Yes.
market that you're getting through your mobile apps and through your API,
Yes.
which is that's what it's all about. That's what we need.
Yeah, that's real business value.
Cool. So why don't we move on? I see we actually have some sample data. Hopefully that screen is coming across.
I apologize. I'm
actually going to make it bigger. That's as big as I can make it.
I was trying to balance between like what I wanted to show and how visible it would be.
Right, and also what you can show. So I appreciate having some real charts here.
Yeah, and so all of this is test data, so that the charts don't look completely pretty and filled out.
Right.
So the sorts of things that we are measuring on there, like top left is transactions per second by API.
Okay.
We're looking at the one to the right of that. The pie chart is distribution by region. So which Apigee region are we hitting?
Okay.
It says east and null. Again, I used a test data set. That would really be east and west.
East and west. Okay.
Yep. So we can understand right where our consumer is coming from, because if we have some of our data centers in a given region, we always expect to skew a little bit one way if we're making back-end API calls.
Mm-hmm.
Then we're tracking error rates by API. We're tracking total client response times, and I don't know if total client response times is actually an accurate description here. We're tracking the time it takes from when the request gets to Apigee to the time it comes all the way back and goes out.
Yeah.
That's what we're calling total client.
Yeah.
But then we break it out by gateway processing time too. How much time is Apigee taking to process the request? How much time is our back end, or if we have an app tier sitting in the middle, we can slice and dice it out and find out at every layer, right, how long is the request taking. Then we're looking at the standard deviations of those two, because averages can be deceiving. So it's always important to look at the standard deviation or 95th percentile or something like that, so you don't sort of fool yourself into comfort, I guess.
Yeah, the average is really great, but X% of the user are getting a horrible.
5% are getting 10 seconds.
Yes,
we'll hear about it.
Yeah,
for sure.
Cool.
So,
do you have goals for like TP99 kind of stuff, or alerts that go off if you're spraying out of the predicted SLA?
Yeah. So we have all of our alerting is done out of the same system too that we are sending all these logs to. So we have rules for every API around what we expect it to be. If we breach it, we're alerting to a number of different systems, PagerDuty, whatever it may be, so people can then take action and resolve the issue.
Okay, I love seeing real data. I think we have one more chart of actual data.
So this actually shows, again, this was in a lower environment, so the numbers look really, really good. But this shows CPU and memory utilization from a couple of our Tomcat nodes and a couple of our Cassandra nodes that support the same API, right? So it just shows how I can overlay two different tiers in the stack and gather some meaningful information about where my bottleneck is.
Yeah. So it's actually a relevant question here, which is there someone sitting there watching live, and how live is the data?
Yes, so the data
are you
is
your turkey waiting for the pager to go.
The data is pushed here, real time or near real time. So yes, I am one of the people sitting there watching the data live during Black Friday, but there are many of us in Minneapolis and in our office in Bangalore as well that are doing the same.
Excellent. Cool. So I think that's what we have on metrics and stuff like that. And now I think we're going to go to a slightly different topic, how to make your API able to respond well.
Yes. Yeah, well, so anti-fragility, it's kind of a little bit of buzzword, right? But anti-fragility really means, right, think Netflix Chaos Monkey, right? So how do my APIs behave under frequent failure? So this is actually something we're starting to POC out, and we haven't been actively practicing for a long period of time. I mean, we've been practicing bringing down nodes while we're running tests, but we're doing it manually. But we had an internal hackathon about a month ago, where a couple of the engineers on our team got together and said, we want to see if we can build a sort of chaos monkey thing that we can execute when we're running performance tests. So what they do, we manage most of our infrastructure with Chef. So they go query Chef server, pull down the list of nodes that are running a given API. You can specify the number of instances that I want to sort of go in and bring down, execute some load, bring them back up, and just see how the system behaves under constant failure. Because, right, if you're not always testing those things, you will find that they don't always work as beautifully as they were designed when it actually comes to happen.
So is this, I mean, how much of this do you do in production versus non-production?
Today, we are not actually doing what Netflix does and bringing down production instances. Today, it's something we're POCing out for testing purposes, right, for performance testing purposes for the most part. But that's the ultimate goal, right? We should feel comfortable in production bringing down a node and feel confident that it's not going to affect our performance and traffic. And I think this is step one for us to get there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how I feel about bringing down live stuff either. But, I mean, do you do the whole canary kind of thing where you deploy new code to
that's
one thing and see what happens?
That is another thing we are absolutely trying to nail down what our best practice is for that. It's something we know we want to do, and we're doing it sort of in a little bit different ways on different APIs today, wherever we can, or wherever the engineer has figured out right on that API what's the best way for me to do this. But yes, that is absolutely a feature that we want to be able to standardize across our stack to say that, right, I'm deploying some new app code, I want it to go to 1% to 2% to 10%. And there's areas in our organization that I think are probably a little further along than us, but we're right on their heels.
Yeah. Okay. Testing is good.
Yes. So this is really about, it's still performance testing, right? But how do we integrate performance testing into our continuous integration pipeline? So I think on the next slide we'll talk about the sort of different kinds of tests that we run. But the core thing, right, again, this is another thing we're sort of maturing internally as well, but the core thing we want to be able to do is on every code change, run some sort of load that can be a leading indicator of whether or not that code change had a performance impact, right? If I move from using a library to call some backend to going to HTTP, what's the real actual performance impact, if any, if I decide to do that. So that's really, I think, or what I was getting at here is that we want to get to the point where we're running our functional tests and some sort of performance test on every single code change.
So do you have you must have some sort of performance test sandbox where you can do that, right?
Yes, yeah. You mean to generate the load?
So I mean, you're obviously so that means it just means your CI environment has got to be big enough to run a meaningful load test.
Yes, yeah, and so the load test, and this is where we haven't exactly nailed down what exactly it means. Is because your CI environment probably isn't going to be as beefy as your production environment, and what is that factor? What is that load level? All things that.
Yeah, I mean, I know everywhere I've worked, including Apigee and BEA, where we've had this kind of continuous performance testing, it's had a huge impact. Because what happens is you find out, hey, the performance degraded by 10% yesterday. Well,
Mhm.
10% isn't much.
Yep.
But if you do that 7 times, you have 100%. Do the math.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so next thing you know, your product is twice as slow. So being
Right.
notified, hey, someone checked in something yesterday,
Mhm.
and introduced a 10% regression,
Yep.
is really valuable.
Yeah, extremely valuable. Yep.
So yes, absolutely. So we got some questions, and we're going to actually get to a whole bunch of them. But I figure maybe we'll go through the next couple slides because the questions are in a lot of different categories. So let's see, let's go on a little bit, and then we'll see kind of where we go.
This is just another general guide. How are we doing on time?
We're doing okay.
Okay.
We're about half an hour in.
Okay.
We have a few more slides to go, and we've got
Okay,
a bunch of
cool.
questions. So I think we're actually doing pretty well.
Awesome.
We'll probably wrap up the talking part in the next 10 minutes, maybe,
Okay.
or
Cool.
so, and then we will
Cool.
move
So
on to some questions.
I won't go into too much depth on this one, but I think the point I was trying to get at with this slide is that you don't necessarily want to be in a situation where performance testing, the discipline of performance testing, is completely removed from the application development team, right? Where I write my app and I just throw some document over the wall to some centralized team, and then they run the performance testing. We have found we've been extremely successful, right? We have, in many instances, developers writing the performance tests for the same code they're developing.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
And their familiarity with the app allows them to write really good tests. So, and not in not all cases it's the developer. We do have some dedicated QA engineers that help out where they need be, but it's just, as a general guideline, I think try to keep the discipline of performance testing as close to the development team as possible. So.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. No, I mean, you must also have people who specialize in getting the environment right for performance testing.
And these would be our
the
QA
tools.
engineers.
Okay, yeah.
And
for saying, yeah, okay, I know you tested your own
Yep.
stuff, but did you think about X?
Yes, and they're very talented.
Yeah.
I think I'm overt about calling them QA engineers. They're not just testers. These are
Right.
really good QA engineers.
Yes. And actually, we got a lot of questions here, but one that I think someone asked, kind of related, but how do you know when you've done your testing that you're actually going to meet the performance requirements for the actual end users out in the world? I'm paraphrasing the question a bit.
Yep.
But it's one thing to say, yeah, within the EC2 region or whatever, performance is X, but from my house,
Yes.
it's a different story.
At some point, you got to realize what's out of your control, right? I can't deploy, 20 million target employees to go hit their mobile app button at the same time, right? So
20 million though, that would actually be really cool if you could. I would love to see that test.
Yep. So I don't know that you can ever get to
You don't have 20 million
level
employees.
of
I'm only
stuff.
kidding.
Yeah, no, not that. We'd have to hire some part-time help, I think. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know that there's a good way, right? We're testing using JMeter, which is a client, right, of some sort.
Yeah.
And we're testing calling from all sorts of different regions, from central regions, east, west, all sorts of different regions in the United States, that are ultimately, right, going through Apigee. So you get a certain level of confidence with that, right? But it's still not quite as distributed as if people were out with mobile apps in the world.
Yeah, I mean, do you do anything with, it used to be, Gomez and Keynote, but I don't know what the, there's...
we do synthetic transaction stuff. Actually, we're currently using RunScope for synthetic
Someone asked about RunScope, so the answer is yes, RunScope.
Yes, for the synthetic transaction sort of stuff,
Interesting.
Yep.
Cool. Types of tests.
The types of tests. So I think the first thing for me to mention on these is those numbers you see are rules of thumb. They are not hard. But these are the sorts of way we think about the different performance tests that we run. And the first one is a stress test. So you have an SLA. Let's say that SLA is 300 milliseconds. The point of my stress test is to see at which level of throughput am I going to breach that SLA? Is it 150 transactions a second? Is it 200 transactions a second? Right? And that's the point at which, right, we have deemed that performance is not acceptable. So the point of the stress test is to find out that breaking point. The load test, or what we would call a load test, would be 80% of stress. Right? So I'd run that for a relatively short duration at 80% of stress, and this would be the one I try to tweak to get right to probably put in my CI environment. Just sort of a baseline gut check sort of test. then the soak test is the one I would run at 80% of load. So load 80% of stress, soak 80% of load for an extended period of time. 48, 72 hours a week, maybe, right? And this is where you bring to light, it's an extremely valuable test. Things like, how does compaction impact when compaction occurs on Cassandra? How does that impact my response time? What happens when what happens when garbage collection occurs? Do I have a memory leak? Those sorts of things can only be accomplished by doing a test like a soak test.
Right.
But this isn't something you're going to do on every code change. Pre-release definitely makes sense, and major architectural changes, those sorts of things are, I mean, it's probably worth doing, right? And then a spike is just, right, I think what it says, right, I'm jumping from 80% to 120%, and again, rule of thumb, because on Black Friday, 120% is not nearly enough. We might be jumping from 80 to 600%. So that's the way we think about them. And those numbers are meant to be a guideline, not a, like, this is exactly what we'll do every time. Yep.
And now for the hard stuff, because so far this all sounds easy to me.
Yes. So there are some really, really hard things that come in the space, and we try to do as much of this Black Friday readiness testing as possible in production, right? Because it's extremely difficult, especially given some of our legacy backends that we can't quickly deploy on virtual infrastructure and have a exact replication of our production environment to do it in any lower environment. So we're kind of sort of forced, and I think it's good that we do as much of the testing as we can in production, right? There's certain things you can't do, though, in prod. We can't execute tens of millions of orders, right? In
you
production.
Can't tell if the credit card processing system is going to hold up, right?
Yeah, if the credit card processing system is hold up. So there's some concessions we have to make, right? We could stub out the response there. We could come up with some fake credit cards that are indicators. But right, I'm really right at that point. I'm not actually testing the whole system, but right, that's the constraints of the world we live in. Is stubbing out responses is one alternative. The other is building performance environments, which we do in some cases too, right? We try to build lower environments that are as close to production as possible. It's just so hard to always get 100% of the way there, but it's another great alternative in those instances where you can't use production as your proving ground.
How many systems does the API touch? I know you started with just store location, and that was all in the cloud, and since then it's
store location. That was our first, right? Our very first API that we released. Dozens of systems. Our products API alone, I think, talks to 3 or 4 backends, and we're consolidating that. But there's really, really fascinating data problems that legacy enterprises have to solve, and we're well down the path, I think, of solving them. But there is an extreme amount of complexity that comes with, tens of years of history and periods of rapid growth, right? So yes, there are many, many systems that our APIs talk to.
Cool. I think we're getting to the end here.
So yeah, if there's a key takeaway, right, it's treat performance testing as a first-class citizen. Don't make it, right, an afterthought. Get out in front of it. Get some of your most talented people working on it, because you can have the best functional, app in the world, but if it doesn't perform, no one's going to use it. And if it goes down, it's just not going to work.
And I think that really is the key takeaway for anything like this. Like anything, we've learned. It's funny, years of computer science, but it's taken the last 10 years for us to learn about unit tests. And test-driven development and writing tests.
Delivery, all that sort of
stuff.
Stuff.
And for some reason, it's taken the industry until the last couple of years to get it right. But I mean, with performance, it's equally important. And I mean, I've seen things go wrong when no one tests until the end. You guys, whenever Black Friday is coming, we get together, and we in Apigee and Target, and we talk about the plan. Everyone should be doing that. We reach out and contact our customers, but everyone who's got any event like this, you've got a big event coming up. Have you thought about maybe doing some tests to see how much load you can actually handle in advance?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is well worth it.
Yes.
Well worth it.
The costs of not doing it are
Yes, are far greater than the cost of spending the time to do it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So with that, we're both on Twitter, and like I mentioned before, slides will be on SlideShare, video will be on YouTube, probably something in the blog. We have a lot of questions. They range from high-level questions to very specific questions to sales pitches from vendors. The third category, we're actually not gonna spend a lot of time on that. This is a good easy one. What is your favorite performance testing tool and why?
Gosh, I think I have to say JMeter, just because again, it's the one I have the most.
It's the one that works for you.
Hands-on experience, and it works for us. But I mean, you can talk to other people who are have spent far more time deep in this space.
Oh yeah.
That are probably more qualified to answer this question. But from my perspective, the why would probably be the community. The community around JMeter is huge. If I run into an issue, I can Google it. It's been solved. There's a robust plugin community too, so they have excellent utilities for working with JSON and parsing stuff out and all that.
That is the nice thing about JMeter. I it's funny. Sometimes JMeter is my least favorite because when people use it in a naive way, it doesn't scale. And then I say, well, can JMeter handle the load? And you guys have figured that out. A lot of people haven't figured that out. So that's one thing to keep track of. Wow, there's a lot of questions. So we may not get to all of them. So how do you store your documentation for testing APIs?
Yeah, so it's a combination of two things. We have an internal wiki that we put a lot of it on, and in the GitHub repos that host a lot of the code, that the sort of performance testing platform related code. We have robust readmes, or we try to keep them as robust as possible as the tool sets continue to evolve. But those would be the two places, readmes and our internal wiki.
Cool. How much are you testing? I'll paraphrase this question, which is, you've got an API at the top. You've got a lot of stuff underneath it. Do you test the layers all the way down?
Yes.
Or are you coming from the top down?
Both.
Okay.
There's definitely both happening, and given sort of the size and complexity of our organization, our ownership of the different layers differs depending on the API. So in instances where we own from the data store up, we'll do four-wall testing on each of them, but the only true test for how the system is going to perform is to do test the whole API. So both. Okay.
Sort of not a testing question, but how you run in production. You mentioned not everything runs in the cloud.
Yes.
Is there an elastic component to this? Does it scale as things are happening, or do you pre-scale?
Today, our best, safest bet is pre-scaling. It is very high on our priority list to get to a point where we can auto-scale. But that provides, or it requires just a fundamental shift in how we're leveraging our infrastructure and those sorts of things, right? So.
And it assumes you can auto-scale quickly.
Right. Yep.
So sometimes a combination of the two makes sense.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Not going to do all of these. Here, I'll take a JMeter question. How do you make JMeter TPS driven?
Gosh, I almost knew I was going to get this question, and there is a controller. And I believe it's part of the, if you download the Extras with Libs plugins at jmeterplugins.org, it's something called some throughput controller. Anyways, I can definitely follow up afterwards with the exact name of the controller, but there is a plugin in the Extra Plugins with Libs at jmetersplugins.org that will
That's cool.
Get you to a TPS-driven test script rather than a virtual users.
Did you say you're running performance tests in production?
Yes, we did.
A lot of people do.
Yes, and we're doing it when we're doing significant, really significant, like Black Friday levels of load. We're doing it during off hours. We're doing United States sleeping time. So the impact of anything, and we monitor extremely closely. So if performance degrades to the point where people are unable to use our apps or the APIs get so slow that they're unusable, we'll kill the test, figure out where our bottlenecks is, fix, and run the next night.
Yeah. Extra monitoring of the high visibility APIs. Does anyone from the business get in touch with you and say, look guys, if the X doesn't work, we're dead?
Yes. I mean, yeah, people ask for that.
I mean, maybe they say that about everything, but
yeah. And we have the flexibility with the way we store our logs to put together views for the business, or even give them the tools they need to mine the data and put together the views they need to be aware of what's happening for their usage, right?
I'm going to answer a few more, maybe 3 or 4 more questions, and probably we might get to more on the blogs. What about these kinds of things where, I mean, obviously you're not just hitting the same API over and over and over again. You posts and puts. I mean, you're testing a mix of load, and I assume that's why you like JMeter, because you can't do that.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, that's kind of thought. What about the relationship between developers and QA? Right? Because you mentioned you have people who specialize in test and quality, people who write code, the people who write code write some of the tests.
Yeah, this is a fascinating question that I think we spend a lot of time thinking about, is what is the right mix for that? So you can go dogmatic both ways. You could say, I have nobody that specializes in QA and developers write all the tests all the time. I definitely lean that way. The other side of the fence would be, I don't want my developers spending time writing tests. They are more valuable if they're cranking out new functionality.
Okay.
That's the other side of the fence. I definitely lean more towards developers should write their own unit, integration, functional, all sorts of tests, right? That being said, I think it has served us well to have a very small group that is tightly integrated with our team of QA engineers that are experts not only in the tool sets but the frameworks and all those sorts of things that we use.
Best practices.
Yeah. And occasionally we'll help in if a developer is swamped with writing tests.
Do you get leadership pushback on the funding? Because you mentioned we've been evangelizing how important it is to do performance testing and how much money you save by not screwing up on the day.
Yeah. No, I don't think we have, because I think we've done a pretty good job telling that story, right, about how important it is. But I've been in other points in my career, I can imagine I would have been in scenarios where, yes, pushback would have occurred, right, to do something like this. We've been granted a lot of freedom to make sure that we're stable and
Okay. There's more questions, but I think we've tackled the ones that seem to be, there are a few of them are kind of duplicated. So if there are a few more that, we look back later and say, oh, I really wish we'd answer that, what we'll do is we'll do a blog or something, because we've been going for a little while. It's about 10 minutes of the hour. Cool. I think we should wrap it up. Is there anything else that we should leave with, or I think we had the key takeaway, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think we covered it all.
Okay, thank you very much. It was very informative. We had a great audience. Please, keep the questions coming. Contact us on Twitter, and I'm really glad you could all join. Thank you very much, and we'll see you later.